Tableau's default filters don't have that many customization options, but by using a multi-value parameter, we have unlimited options for how we want to design our filters. We can use any image we want to represent selected or not, and we can filter by more than one dimension like this table toggle. And I'll add all these images below. I'll create these filters around the fields category and rating. I'll create a new worksheet and start with our checkbox filter. For this one, we'll use category, so I'll create a new parameter, and I'll call it the category param. Set the data type to a string and remove anything in the current values. Then I'll right-click and show it on the worksheet. Then I'll create a calculated field and I'll call it checkbox-select. This calculation is going to check if the value of the category is selected or not, like a filter does. So I'll type contains, parentheses, the category parameter, comma, the category. I'll create another calculated field and call it checkbox-name. This first line I'm typing checks if the parameter list contains the category. If it does, then it replaces the category and a comma in the parameter list with nothing. Otherwise, it'll add the category and a comma to the parameter list. So if the parameter list already includes the category, remove it from the list, otherwise add it. In the columns, I'll type 0 twice. And then I'll add category to our rows. In the first mark, I'm going to change it to a shape, and I'll add our name and our select calculated fields. And I want select, which returns true or false, to determine our shape. For the second mark, I want to change this to a bar and bring in the name field and the category field. And I'll change category to be text. In the colors and the marks, I want to change it to 0% and have no border. Then I'll right-click on one of the zeros in our columns and make it a dual axis. And then right-click on category in the rows and uncheck show header. We can use the two axes to control the positioning of both the shape and the text so they don't overlap. I'll edit the first axis and make it custom. Then I'll give it a fixed range from -3 to 5. And you can see how it pushed the labels to the left. On the second axis, I'm going to make it custom as well and give it a fixed range from -1 to 5. You can play around with the numbers, but I found this positioning to work pretty well. And now I don't need the axes anymore, so I'll uncheck show header. For formatting, I'm just going to remove the row divider and the column divider. I'll also get rid of the 0 lines for the sheet and the grid lines for the columns. And I also want to remove the measure name coloring and the all marks. On a dashboard, I'll add our checkbox worksheet. Hide the title and get rid of the parameter. And I want this to be set to entire view, and then I'll resize it. To add the functionality, I'm going to go to the Dashboards tab at the top and hit Actions. And then I'll add a change parameter action. I'll call this one the checkbox param, and for the source sheet, I'll just leave checkbox, and for the target param, I'll do the category param. For the source field, I'll do the checkbox name. And now when I click on software, you can see that it changed from a circle to a square. Those are the values that we currently have assigned to true and false. But I can edit the shapes, and I'm going to choose my filter images shape palette, but I have another video for how to load your own shape palette. For false, I want to assign the empty box, and for true, I want to select the shape with the check mark in it. Going back to the worksheet, you can increase the size of your shape by using the size slider in the marks. And now I don't need the legend anymore, and I can format the font to be a little bit larger. But now when I click on services, you can see it grays out all the other values. So I'm going to go back to the checkbox worksheet and create a calculated field called true with the value true in it. and then I'll create one for false with the value false in it. Under the all marks, I'll drag true and false in. Then going back to the dashboard, I'll go to the dashboard tab, hit actions, and add a filter action. For the source sheet, I want just the checkbox. And for the target sheet, I want to drop down and choose the checkbox worksheet. I want to run the action on selecting and show all values when clearing the selection. For the selected fields, I'll choose true and then false. And now I can interact with our checkbox filter without any highlighting. To use this filter in another worksheet, I'm just going to go to the default filter and add sales in, and then I'll move the checkbox select field in and select only true. So now whatever I have selected in the checkbox filter will filter that worksheet. And for these next ones, I'm not going to walk through all the steps again, but just what's required for the enhancements. So for highlighting, I'm going to duplicate what we have for our checkbox worksheet, and I'll call it highlight. You wouldn't normally need to do this if you only wanted to show one filter, but for this I want to add a highlight effect, so I want to use different shapes. So I need to duplicate the two fields that we created, name and select. And I'll edit the name so that it's highlight instead of checkbox. And then in the marks, I need to change out all the fields that have checkbox in them to the highlight fields. The reason this is necessary, at least for the select, is because we're using select as the shape. And for highlighting, I want to assign different shapes to these. And if you notice they're getting squished, just drag down, and then I'll decrease the size of the shapes a little bit. To get the highlighting effect, I want to change the shapes. And for false, I'm going to choose an empty box. And for true, I want to choose the box with a check mark in it and that has a background. To get the highlighting for the values, I'm going to change the color to 100%. And then I'll drag our select field into the second marks and change it to a color. You can see the bars are really small, so I'm going to go in and change 0 to 1. And then to get the labels aligned to the left, I'll just go to label in the second marks and choose left. To get the highlighting colors to match, edit the colors in the legend. And for false, I want to set it to whatever the background color is, which is white. And for true, I want to set it to the same color I have for the background of my checkboxes. I have another video for how to create a custom color palette so you can get the colors to match exactly. In the dashboard, I'll add our highlight worksheet, hide the title, and get rid of all the things that we don't need. Then I'll resize it and set it to entire view. You can see there's still a bit of space between the checkboxes and the text, so I'm going to go back to the worksheet and show the headers, and then I'll edit the top axis and do -2 to 5. And for the bottom axis, I'll do -1 to 4. You might have to play around with it a little bit to get it to how you want it. And on the dashboard, you can see there's still a little bit, so I can either decrease the size of the width of the worksheet, or I can go back to the worksheet and increase the size of the checkboxes, and that should cover the gap. But you can see the top and bottom are a little bit off still, so you might have to play with the size of the shapes and the bars to get it to be perfectly aligned. Perfect. So now when I click on the hardware in the checkbox filter, it also updates the filter in the highlight worksheet. But to add the functionality to the highlight worksheet, I need to go to the dashboard tab at the top and hit actions again. I'll add a parameter action, and for the source sheet, I'll just do highlight. For the target parameter, I'll choose the category param, and for the source field, I'll do the highlight name. Now that we have the functionality added, I'm going to get rid of the highlighting, and I already have true and false in the all marks because I copied this over from another worksheet. So I'll go to Dashboard, Actions, and add another filter action. For the source sheet, I'll choose the highlight worksheet within the dashboard, and for the target sheet, I'll drop down and choose the highlight worksheet. I want to run the action on selecting and show all values when clearing the selection. For the selected fields, I'll do true and false again. The next worksheet will be if you want to add multiple lines to the values of a filter. And because this one is essentially our checkbox one with multiple lines, I'm going to duplicate the checkbox worksheet and I'll call it multi-lines. The only thing you need to do to add a value in here is to drag that value, which I'll do sum of sales, into the second marks and change it to text. Then I can use the label and the marks to rearrange the text to how I want it displayed. So I'll add a dollar in front of sum of sales and I'll make it a little bit smaller. Going back to the dashboard, I'll add our multi-lines worksheet. I'll hide the title and get rid of the things that we don't need. And then I'll set it to the entire view and resize it. Because this one uses the same information as our checkbox, I'll just go to Dashboard, Actions. I'll edit our checkbox parameter action and add the multi-lines to the source sheets. Disabling the highlighting I'll have to do separately, so I'll add a filter action, and because I duplicated this worksheet, I already have true and false in there. So for the source sheet, I'll choose the multi-lines within the dashboard, and for the target sheet, I'll choose the multi-lines worksheet. And I'll use the same settings as I have on all the other ones. We use the select field to determine the shapes. So those shapes are assigned to the values in that field. As an illustration, I'll go back to the multi-lines worksheet and edit the shapes for the checkbox select field. And I'll choose two different ones that I have in my filter images palette. And now when I go back to the dashboard, you can see the checkbox worksheet inherited those new shapes as well. So say you had two dashboards and one workbook, and you want to include the same filter like category on both, but you want the shapes to be different on each. So here we have a checkbox filter, and I want to add a toggle filter on the same field, category, even though both use values from the category field. To do this, I'll duplicate our checkbox worksheet, and I'll rename it toggle. All we need to do to change the shapes on our toggle worksheet without changing the shapes on our checkbox worksheet is duplicate our name and select field. And I'll rename these with toggle instead of checkbox. And then replace all the checkbox fields in our marks with our toggle fields. And I'll just drag down to increase the size and make the size of the shapes a little bit smaller. And now I can edit the shapes and choose something different like a toggle. So for false, I'll do a gray toggle, and for true, I'll do a green toggle. I'll add this new worksheet to the dashboard. Hide the title and get rid of the things we don't need. Then I'll resize it and set it to the entire view. And because we're using different fields, we need to add in the functionality. So I'll go to Dashboard, Actions again, and I'll add a parameter action. For the source sheet, I'll only have toggle checked. The target param will still be our category param, and the source field will be the toggle name. And now our toggles function as a filter. To disable the highlighting, I'll go back to Dashboard, Actions. I'll add a filter action, and for the source sheet, I'll only have toggle checked. And for the target sheet, I'll choose toggle. And I'll repeat the settings I have on all the other disable highlighting actions. So right now we're able to toggle on this one dimension category, but we can add 2 dimensions to make a toggle table. So I'll start with our one-dimensional toggle by duplicating the toggle worksheet. And I'll call this the table toggle. Since we're going to be using a new dimension here, category and rating, we'll need to create a new parameter. I'll call this category plus rating param. Change the data type to a string and leave the current value as blank. Rating is a measure right now, so I need to right click on it and convert it to a dimension. Then I'll duplicate our toggle select field and I'll edit it, calling it table toggle select. And instead of the category param, I need to do the category plus rating param. And instead of just the category field, I need to do category plus the string of the rating. This will concatenate these two dimensions. I'll also duplicate the toggle name field and edit it to be the table toggle name. And everywhere there's a category param, I'll replace it with our category plus rating param. And everywhere there's a category, I'll add the string of the rating. I'll pull rating into the columns to get a table structure. And I can remove the second 0 because we don't need the labels in there anymore. So I'll right click on the category in the rows to show the header. And then I'll hide the field label for rating and category, leaving us with just the values from category and rating in a table format. But the toggles are currently not centered, so I'm going to right click and show the header for the sum of the 0. And then I'll edit the axis to be between -1 and 1. I also need to replace the toggle fields that we have in there currently with the table toggle fields that we just created. I'll add the table toggle worksheet to the dashboard, hide the title, get rid of the things that we don't need, and resize it. Then I'll set it to fill the entire view. To add functionality, I need to go to Dashboard, Actions, and add a parameter action. I'll call this Table Toggle Param, and for the source sheet, I just want the Table Toggle worksheet selected. And I'll be targeting the Category plus Rating param, using the Table Toggle name as the source field. So now when I click on these circles, they turn into squares. Going back to the worksheet, I'll edit the shapes so I can choose the toggle images. Going back to the dashboard, I can now filter using these toggles. To disable highlighting, I'll go to Dashboard Actions, add a filter action, and under Source Sheets, I'll check Table Toggle, and under Target Sheet, I'll drop down and hit Table Toggle. And I'll keep these settings the same as I have for all the other ones. If I click on Hardware category with a rating of 4, it's not going to filter for all hardware or all rating of 4. We've set this up using 2 dimensions so we can get a unique combination using these 2 filters. To use this filter in a worksheet, I'll go back to the default filter worksheet and put the sum of the sales in the rows and category and rating into the columns. To utilize our table toggle, I'll move the select field for table toggle into the filters and choose only true. So now if I go back to the dashboard and I choose the services category with a rating of 4, you can see that's the only thing it added to the visual. This kind of filter that uses 2 dimensions and allows for every unique possibility can be really useful if you want to look at your data from different angles at the same time. This next one will be structured a little bit differently. I'll build the filter using an underline to indicate whether the filter is selected or not. And the nice thing about this one is it can also be used as a legend if your visual also contains these colors. So I'll create a new worksheet and call it Label, and drag category into the columns and type 0 in the rows. Then I'll duplicate our checkbox calculative fields and edit them to be label instead of checkbox. I'll pull both the label name and label select into the marks. And I want select to be the first dimension we color on. Then I'll pull category into the marks twice. And I want one of the categories to be the second dimension we color on, and the other one to be a label. Under the marks, I'll change it from a bar to a Gantt bar, which will make the lines a bit thicker. And then I'll right-click category and uncheck show header, and do the same thing for the sum of 0. For formatting, I'll go to the lines and remove the 0 lines for the sheet and the axis rulers for the sheet. I also want to get rid of the grid lines for the rows, so we're left with just the labels. And then on the dashboard, I'll add our label worksheet. Get rid of the legend, hide the title, and resize it. And I'm just going to format it real quick so the font size matches the rest of our filters. To add the functionality, I'll go to Dashboard, Actions, and I'll add a parameter action. I'll call this the label param, and for the source sheet, I just want to have our label worksheet checked off. I'll target the category param and use the label name as the source field. And I'll select each label so that they're all false. Going back to the worksheet, I'll edit the colors, and I'll choose a white for all the falses. That way, if it's false, it doesn't look selected, and there's no underline. Going back to the dashboard, I'll turn these all to true. Go back to the label worksheet, edit the colors, and this is how it can be used as a legend as well. So if I had another chart that also colored by these categories, I would choose the same coloring. And now we can see our labels are working, and it's not underlined when it's false, and it's underlined with its respective category color when it's true. To disable the highlighting, I'll add true and false to our marks. Then I'll go to Dashboard, Actions, and add a filter action. For the source sheet, I want it to be the label worksheet within the dashboard. And for the target sheet, I want it to be the label worksheet itself. And I'll keep these settings the same as I have for the other ones. And now these labels can function as a filter and a legend. For the next one, which is radio buttons, I'll duplicate our label worksheet. To get the buttons, I'm going to type 0 into the rows. And under the all marks, I want to change it to a shape. For the first mark, I only need to keep the label name and the true and false for disabling highlighting. And then under the shapes mark, I'm going to go to more shapes and choose the rating palette. And then I'll do this one that looks like a little radio button. For the second mark, I can get rid of our category text because we'll do that separately. And for the shape, I want it to be a filled in circle. And then I'll right click on one of our zeros and make it a dual axis. And then I also want to synchronize the axis. I can use the size slider in the second mark to decrease the size of our filled in circle. So just like our underline label one, this one can also work as a legend. And I'll hide the headers and format the worksheet to get rid of the row divider and the column divider. To get our labels to be dynamically colored as well, I'll duplicate our radio worksheet. I'll pull measure values into the columns and get rid of everything in our rows. The little dots you see here are going to be the start and end of our line, which gives us that rounded effect. And I'll also type the minimum of 10 in our columns. This will be for positioning our labels. In the measure values, I'll type the minimum of 0 and the minimum of 20. And I'll get rid of all the other measure values. This will set the start and end point for our line. So I need to go to the first mark and change it to a line. For this one, there's going to be 3 dimensions which we color on. The first dimension will be the label select field, which will allow us to color based on whether it's selected or not. The second dimension we'll color on is the measure names, and this will allow us to get a gradient color. And the third dimension we'll color on is category. So this will give us a distinct color for each category. I'm going to use the size slider in the marks to make it bigger so we can see the color better. And I'll drag the axis down to give us more space. For the second mark, instead of being a shape, I want this to be text, since this will be for our label. So I'll drag category in and change it to text. And then I'll right-click on one of the continuous measures in our columns and make it a dual axis. And then I'll synchronize them, which will center the text. Under text in the labels, I'm going to make this bold so it's easier to read. And then I'll right-click on the axis and uncheck Show Header. To get rid of these values here, I'll go to the label in the first mark and uncheck Show Mark Labels. And then I'll format the worksheet to get rid of the column grid lines. On the dashboard, I'll add our 2 worksheets for the radio and the label. And for the radio, I can get rid of the legend, hide the title, and resize it. For the label, I'll keep the legend but hide the title and resize it. And I'll set this to entire view. To give it functionality, I'll go to Dashboard, Actions, and because this uses the same select and name fields as our other label, I'll edit the label parameter we have. And under the source sheets, I'll just check off the with label and the radio button. And now that they're functional, I'll set them all to true and edit the legend for our labels. The minimum of 0 is going to be the left side of our gradients, and the minimum of 20 is going to be the right side of our gradient label. So I'll choose slightly darker colors for the left side and slightly lighter colors for the right side. And I'll set these all to false, so I can make them all white when they're not selected. And now we can use the radio or the label to act as a filter. But it's still graying out the other ones, so I'm going to go to our worksheets real quick and just check to make sure we have true and false within our marks. And then I'll go to Dashboard, Actions, and I'll add a filter action. For the radio one, I'll uncheck all the source sheets that are not radio. And for the target sheet, I'll choose the radio worksheet. And I'll keep the settings the same as I have for all the other ones. And I'll add an action for the label one and uncheck all the source sheets that are not with label. And then for the target sheet, I'll choose only the with label worksheet. And I'll do the same settings as I have. You can see when I change the size of the worksheet for the radio button, it kind of gets cut off. To fix this, go to the worksheet for the radio, and we can use the first and second mark to change the size. For the next one, I'll do a star rating filter. So I'm just going to create a new worksheet. And because this uses rating, which we haven't created a parameter for just the rating, I'm going to create a new parameter and I'll call it the rating param. For the date type, you could do a string or a float. I'm just going to go ahead and do a string and keep the current value as empty. I'm going to borrow our checkbox name calculated field. So I'll duplicate that and then edit it. And I'll call this the star rating name. Instead of using the category param, I'll use our rating param. And instead of category, I'm going to do this string of rating. And I'll go ahead and replace all of those throughout the calculated field. I also need to duplicate our checkbox select field. And then I'll edit it. And I'll call this star rating select. And I'll replace category param with our rating param, and our category field with a string of our rating field. To create the structure, I'll drag the rating field into the columns and the star rating, name, and select fields into the marks. In the marks, I'll change it to a shape, and I'll make our star rating select field determine the shape. But right now you can see they're all false, and if I changed it to true, there would be no distinction between any of the ratings and true. So instead, I'm going to edit our calculated field for the star rating select, and I'll say if our function is true, then do string of true plus the string of our rating. Else do the string of false. So now we have 6 values to work with, either true 1, true 2, true 3, etc., or false. For formatting, I'll right-click on our rating and uncheck Show Header. And then I'll also remove the row dividers. On our dashboard, I'll bring our star rating worksheet in, hide the title, and resize it. And I want to change it from standard to fill the entire view. To add the functionality, I'll go to Dashboard Actions, and I'll add a parameter action. I'll call this the star rating param, and for the source sheet, I just want to have our star rating worksheet checked off. For the target parameter, I'll choose our rating param, and for the source field, I'll do the name for the star rating. Now when I click on one of these boxes, you can see it doesn't just change to one shape. Each rating is assigned a different true shape. So I'll turn these all back to false, and I'll edit our legend for our shapes. In my filter images folder, I have a star with nothing in it, so I'm going to assign that to be false. Then I'll turn these all to true, and I'll edit the legend again. In that same folder, I have a bunch of stars that I filled with different levels of satisfaction, 1 being the least satisfied and 5 being the most. So I'm just going to go ahead and fill that in for all the ratings. And now I can use these stars to filter based on ratings 1 to 5. But I don't like that it grays everything else out, so I'm going to go back to the star rating worksheet, and I'll drag true and false into the marks. Then I'll go back to the dashboard, go to the dashboard tab, and hit Actions. I'll add a filter action, and for the source sheet, I only want the star rating 1 to be checked off. And for the target sheet, I want to select the star rating worksheet. I'll keep all the other settings the same as I have for the other ones. And now we can filter using the stars. I'm going to go back to the worksheet and increase the size of the stars a little bit. For this next one, I called it multi-toggle, but technically all of these are multi-toggle. It's going to be the same one as the star rating, but I wanted to show that you can really use any image. So I'll duplicate our star rating worksheet, and I'll call this one dog ratings. Since I'll be using different shapes for this, I'm going to duplicate our star rating name field, and then edit it. And I'll call this one dog rating name. I'll also duplicate our star rating select field, and I'll call it dog rating select. And then I'll replace our star rating calculated fields with our dog rating calculated fields. This way we can do different shapes, even though it's filtering the same field. So I'll edit the shapes and use my same filter images folder, but this time instead of stars with different satisfaction levels, I'm going to use these images I made of my dog to represent least satisfied to most satisfied. And I'll use the size slider and the markers to make these larger, and also drag down to make them a bit bigger. On the dashboard, I'll add our dog rating worksheet, hide the title, and resize it. And I want this to fill up the entire view. To add the functionality, I'll go to Dashboard Actions again, and I'll add a parameter action. I'll call this one dog rating param, and for the source sheet, I only want to have dog rating checked off. I'll be targeting the rating param, and I'll use the dog rating name as the source field. And I'm gonna go ahead and disable the highlighting while we're here, so I'll add a filter action. And for the source sheet, I just want the dog rating. And for the target sheet, I just want the dog rating worksheet. The rest I'll keep the same as I have for all the other disable highlightings. And I'm going to click one of these to turn it to false, so I can assign just the empty banner as false. And now we have so many options for designing our filters using any image we want. This also allows us to use our filters as legends, and it allows us to filter on multiple dimensions.